Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views we hope are relevant to you. Today, as the world's eyes turn their accusing stare on India, Modi falls back on the tired old excuse that it's all an evil conspiracy cooked up by Pakistan. In the US, what will the new Trump era mean for India's transnational repression agenda? Meanwhile, in Punjab, India gloats over its success in ensuring leadership in Sikh organisations continues to fail the community. And as the anniversary of the Sikh Genocide passes once again, a senior Congress Party official of all people finds the courage to demand justice and label the events of 1984 as not a riot but indeed a genocide. And finally, the fake democracy of India is highlighted once again in J&K as the newly elected leaders wake up and realise they don't actually have any power at all. All very predictable. Well, all this and more on today's show. And joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our amazing viewers out there. Don't forget to let us know where you're logging in from and where you heard about us from, whether it was Facebook or YouTube search or wherever. Let us know. We're always interested in these useless little facts that we call information.
Indeed we are. And James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And of course, as usual, we'll be taking a look at loads of your great comments, which you've been filling up below the videos at the end of the show. So thank you, as always, for those. So James, let's get the show on the road. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
Here goes Modi and his government once again with all their conspiracy and anti-Canada rhetoric. It just continues on and on. And this time they're saying that Canada is teaming up with Pakistan's ISI to target India. And it's just ridiculous. They have actually claimed that they have irrefutable proof, but they're not saying what it is, and they sure as hell haven't let the Canadian government in on the secret because they are still just flapping their gums and spreading words or spreading their lies and their narrative without actually pushing any of the facts or information out there. They have contacted the Canadian Border Services Agency. They have contacted various levels of government, demanding that Canada turn around and extradite one of their own CBSA agents back to India or to India, and that was Sandeep Singh Sadhu. And again, they are saying that he has a very significant role in the assassination of someone there in India. So let's take a quick peek at that, and then we'll take a look more at the CBSA and how they screen their staff and what this agent had to go through in order to get his job. And yeah, the government knows that and has basically told India that they're full of shit. And that's what it comes down to. So in India, they are making claims against this individual, saying that he was involved in the Shara Chakra for his role in mastermind the killing of Sandhu. And he was a teacher that was conferred, and his role in fighting with militancy among the subplots in a larger anti-India conspiracy involving Pakistan's ISI. Now that is really the only reference that they make to Pakistan's ISI, but they claim that Canada is teaming up with them to target India. So it's just ridiculous all the way through. Now, of course, the Canadian government also stated when the ask or the demand by India was made to extradite our border services agent, that all CBSA employees go through rigorous background checks and reviews prior to employment and periodically throughout their career. And anything that calls into question their reliability is flagged, and they are not hired or they are removed from their position. They have absolutely no evidence to support what India is claiming. They have absolutely no evidence from India. And it's just a very, very clear no by the Canadian government. They have confirmed that he works for the government of Canada, that he works for the Canadian Border Services Agency, and they've also confirmed that they have basically told Modi to go pound sand. They are not extraditing him because there is no evidence that he has been involved in this case or in anything other. So again, this is just ridiculous. And the article goes on, just basically, going on about Sandhu's murder and what they believe is the link by our CBSA, Mr. Sidhu. But again, it's all very loosely placed words that really prove nothing. It's just their accusations. And again, it's not uncommon for the India government, raw agency, and the RSS to make accusations against anyone, not just in Canada, but anyone around the world, as terrorists for speaking out against India and then fabricating cases against them. And this has been going on, for forever now. And that's where it really comes down to the truth and the lies that are spread consistently by India's narrative. And Canada's just not being pulled into it. They're just saying, no, bring us evidence that is credible and factual, and then we'll review it again. But until that time, you're not getting anything out of us. And that is really the end of it at that point. So let's take a quick peek, Angus, at how the hiring works for the Canadian Border Services Agency. Now, it is a long process, and we're just going to scroll through quickly of this. And of course, you've got to be a citizen or permanent resident. Driver's license must be prepared to work anywhere in Canada. And then it goes on. There's physical fitness evaluations. There's several levels of security clearance, psychological assessments, and then of course the different training programs that they do. But it could take, just in the application process, up to 18 months to get in to even start training with the CBSA. Now, a lot of that has to do with that they are conducting very vigorous background checks. They're not only doing background checks on the potential employees, but they're also looking at immediate family members, at associates, at travel history. They are just basically going in, and they will know what you had for grade 2 on a certain date for lunch. That's how in-depth that these background security checks can get for the government of Canada. And it is really, when they are getting, some of it is secret level clearances. So yeah, it is the highest. Now, just in the application process, as I said, can take up to 18 months. And then there's another up to 2 years combined with all the training programs and on-the-job training. So they are not just given a position, hired and put in place. It is a very long and vigorous process. But with that said, it also has to be really firmly reminded to people that they also, again, go through continuous security clearances every several years. All this makes sure that the credibility of every officer guarding our borders is monitored and taken seriously. Are there some that have probably got in that shouldn't have? Absolutely. No system is perfect. However, it shows the dedication that the Canadian government has to keeping our borders safe, to keeping our country safe, and to making sure that if any of our people who are responsible for the border and national security have any questionable actions in their history, of course the government is going to take note of that, and they are going to remove that person, and they're not going to just turn around and deny any country. So with India making these claims, of course, that triggers an automatic in-depth review of all of the background checks of this individual, plus they do a new round just to ensure that that this is a legitimate denial of extradition, and that the person hasn't been doing anything behind their backs that they haven't caught in regular systems. So it is, again, it's triggered another clearing, but they found nothing in that, Angus.
It's, if we take this story at face value, basically, this is it's a pretty familiar story. This is a Sikh living overseas who's been accused of terrorism by India, and of course Canada has gone through the normal protocols, the rule of law that it always does, that every Western nation does when any other nation demands extradition of a person. The local law enforcement process kicks into motion and they make up their own mind. And a judge usually looks at the evidence presented by the foreign nation and they will make a call whether or not there is a genuine reason for genuine grounds for extradition, because ultimately all the Five Eyes nations are operating under the rule of law, the democratic rule of law. It's almost flawless, our system. Things do go wrong, and when they do go wrong, it's usually by accident, not by design.
That's right.
So when we look at this story, India has, on the face of it, presented supposed evidence to Canada about this guy, and Canada has looked at it and reviewed it and said, sorry, there is no case to answer. And of course, this case is reflected across countless other Sikh and Khalistani campaigners who've gone through the same process, who've basically fled India in fear of their literal lives, gone to Canada and other countries, and India has, as a result, who sees these people as political opponents. These are not terrorists in any way, shape or form, but they're clearly troublemakers in India. Now, it's not illegal to be a troublemaker in any democratic nation. You can stand up and pretty much say whatever you want, as long as it doesn't cross the line of legality and incite violence. You can criticise, call out any government. You can call any government almost any name under the sun. That's how democracy works. India, unfortunately, has got this twisted version of democracy, which actually in reality is no democracy at all, where its political opponents flee for their lives to other countries. So what does India do? It then concocts a whole catalogue, a portfolio of what it calls evidence, presents it to these foreign nations and says, you've got to return this person through the extradition process so they can face law in India because they are terrorists. Well, unfortunately for India is that Canada and all the other Western nations, they review these documents and they, in actually pretty much all cases, have said, no, these people are political opponents. They have every right under the freedom of speech and under any democratic norms to stand up and say what they've said. Yeah. They are not terrorists. So on face value, this has fallen at the first hurdle. And unfortunately, Modi now and the BJP are being seen by the West, both now in the mainstream and certainly behind the scenes. Certainly the civil servants in all these nations have realised what India's game is. And unfortunately, they've just thrown it back at India, saying, we know what you're up to, it's just not going to wash. And now the mainstream media and the public are also finding this out because, of course, through India's strategic errors by transnational repression and making it so public and so obvious, even the mainstream media and the general public now are seeing India for what it is. So unfortunately, their reputation, both internally, and legally, and now, of course, publicly, is in tatters. Now, we come back to this whole conspiracy theory that it's all concocted by the ISI, the intelligence service of Pakistan. Now, let's look at the real politic of this. Yes, Pakistan is, on at least on paper, an enemy of India. They've always butted heads since 1947. Ever since partition, they've even come to physical blows on several occasions. These are two nuclear-armed powers who actually have come to physical blows against each other over various issues since 1947. So, yeah, there is clearly a lot of enmity, a lot of distrust, and a lot of problems between Pakistan and India. So yes, it is quite likely that ISI have been up to all sorts of no good against India over recent years. Now, the reality is, though, and when we look at the whole Khalistan issue, yeah, Khalistan probably does play into the hands of the ISI and Pakistan. But in reality, Pakistan actually has a lot of its own issues that are frankly a lot more important to Pakistan at the moment. Imran Khan, the previous president of Pakistan, he has been in prison recently, and Pakistan is now essentially ruled by a military junta, as it almost has been since partition. It's had various democratic elections, and its prime ministers, rather not president, its prime ministers have come and gone, including Imran Khan, but ultimately the country has been, certainly in recent decades, run by the military. That military is more actually, frankly, concerned with trying to keep a lid on all the issues and the militancy going on in Pakistan and what's filtering over the border from Afghanistan than it has really in butting heads with India. It's got bigger things on its plate than worrying about India. That's not to say it hasn't dabbled, probably, in a few little shenanigans going on, certainly in J&K, which is quite likely. There's certain goings on in J&K, and maybe even to a limited extent in the Punjab. It's not a big issue. Now, the allegation that Canada is conspiring with ISI to create this whole problem against India and to try, well, essentially by extension, bring down the Modi government. Please do me a favour. Canada has bigger things to think about than India and the Sikh population, its Sikh population and the Khalistan issue. The Five Eyes have got bigger things to worry about, like China, like Russia, like Ukraine. And unfortunately, I think Modi's flattering himself if he thinks that Canada would conspire with the ISI with some great complex conspiracy to attack the BJP in India and bring India down in that respect is just a little far-fetched. It's not going to go on. I'm sure conversations have been had between CSIS and ISI about certain matters on maybe periodic occasions when it comes up to it. But Canada is probably deeply suspicious, or CSIS will be deeply suspicious of the ISI and of Pakistan as a nation. Of course, there are a lot of Islamic militancy, unfortunately, does come from Pakistan and certainly the border regions with Afghanistan. And of course the whole Taliban issue and ISIS, etc., that extreme end of Islam. And so CSIS naturally will have a deep suspicion of ISI. It's not going to be jumping into bed with ISI to attack India. That is just not going to happen. There may be an alignment every now and again of operations, but that's as close as it's ever going to come. There is going to be no actual initiated collaboration between CSIS and ISI. I just cannot see that happening unless there was a much bigger thing at stake. Now, that bigger thing at stake will be more to do with China than India. CSIS and by extension the Canadian government want India on side. They really need India on side. If they had to choose between India and Pakistan, they're going to choose India simply because it's a bigger nation, it's a more strategic ally to butt up against China. So again, Mr. Modi, unfortunately, this isn't about conspiracy theories. Again, James, as we said yesterday, this is all about diversion. It's all about, firstly, this obsessive agenda to try and bring down the Khalistan movement, which is failing massively, and thus resorting to more desperate measures. And secondly, it's all diversionary tactics to try and deflect away from the fact that Modi and the BJP and the RSS have been caught red-handed killing British citizens, Canadian citizens and US citizens on their own soil, James. Same old story.
Yeah, exactly. And let's also keep in mind that we've covered this story once before when they first made accusations against the CBSA guard and actually put both him and his family at heavy risk when they actually published his home address in various India propaganda news. So it's it's just another thread in what needs to be pulled and undone. But where it's going to end, we just don't know. But speaking of homes, it looks like Donald Trump is moving back to the old neighborhood. Now, what that's going to mean for India, that is another story. Now, I've brought up a couple of articles here. The first one, of course, just being a general showing that Modi, of course, has already spent no time in reaching out to President-elect Donald Trump, and he is looking forward to working with Trump once again. Now, keep in mind that Modi and Trump actually had a fairly amicable relationship. They did get along well, and they had a lot going on that was undone by the Biden government. So there were trade, there was, military contracts. There was a lot of things going on that were shut down by Biden, by his administration. And then they turned around and basically ignored it until now. So now that Trump will be back in the office, back in the White House in January, it leads us to question whether or not it's going to be what Modi expects. Or is it going to be a big slap in the face to Modi to basically tell him to stay the hell out of our country when it comes to foreign interference, when it comes to transnational repression, and when it comes to all of the bullshit that they've been pulling over the last several years that's really come out since Trump was in office the last time. Now, of course, we know that Donald Trump is very much about the border control. We know that he is taking steps to make sure that visas and immigration applications are handled in a much more a much more stricter fashion in terms of background checks and other things similar to Canada. It's tightening up the application process and the screening. Now, we know that that is a big thing on Trump's agenda. We also know that he is looking to track down and deport the illegals that are in the U.S. He wants people who have overstayed their visas or gotten in illegally to get the boot right out of the country. And that's interesting because how many of the RSS and RAW people are still hiding there with expired visas or with student visas that they're not actually even registered for school, which is another ploy that we see that India takes. So with that, you also have to look at trade and tariffs and whether or not that's going to have a huge impact on how Trump handles the trade agreements that were sidelined when he left office after his last term. What they're going to take shape as, of course, the economy and the world is looking a lot different than it did at that time. The geopolitical spectrum is different, but also the economy on a global scale is a lot different than it was. And Trump wants to protect a lot of U.S. companies, of U.S. individuals and families, but where will he take that, and what is the future of the relationship between India and Trump? We will have to wait and see. We know that J.D. Vance, through his wife, does have ties to India. Again, we'll have to wait and see. And then finally, we also have to keep in mind that he has committed to ending the war both in Ukraine and the conflict in the Middle East. He thinks he's going to do that in record time. Again, that's a wait and see. But what if he does make his attempts and make his demands to Putin and to Zelensky to get this, to get a ceasefire and to start working towards a peace solution? If they do not adhere to that, what is that going to look like in terms of trade partners with Russia if Putin doesn't want to do anything to appease Trump at that level? It's going to be interesting because at that point, are they going to start putting sanctions on companies that continue to trade with Russia? And that, of course, would have a big impact on India's economy, given that they are one of the biggest energy providers in terms of fuel and other resources. That, of course, Donald Trump wants to get those contracts shifted to the U.S. so that they can sell a lot of the oil and natural gas to India as well. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But I think that if Modi thinks it's going to be just business as usual, Angus, I think he's in for a big wake-up call from Trump and his administration.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, this whole Trump story. And I think, James, when we discussed it yesterday, I said that one of the reasons that I'm a huge fan of Trump is that it's his sheer unpredictability. He's not a politician. He's a businessman by background. And before he became president that first time round, I did predict he will either be one of the best presidents the US ever has, or he will start World War III. That's the sort of polarized character that he is. He is a person who, by not being a politician, he's actually taken on the political establishment. And the reason why I supported the whole concept of Donald Trump was because the US political establishment needed a firm kick up the backside, actually, as does the whole Western political establishment. It really needed a firm kick up the backside. The Western politics, I think, has been lost in the wilderness for a long time. It's lost touch, it's disengaged with the people. They're more all about politics and their own little world than actually doing the job that they were ever elected for. Donald Trump comes along and gives them that proverbial kick up the backside, saying, no, I'm a businessman. The difference between business people and politicians are in it to win votes. Business people are in it to get results done. Because, of course, when you're in business, if you don't deliver the results, you're out of a job. It's plain and simple. All politicians care about is just getting re-elected, and those two things are not necessarily aligned. So this is why I think this next term Donald Trump will be even more interesting than that first, because he's going to come into quite a very unstable world. We've had 4 or 5 odd years of Biden, a very weak leadership. and in which case we've seen Iran really exerting its own power globally. We've seen Russia doing the same in Ukraine, and North Korea, of course, is still bubbling away. I mean, we've taken our eye off the ball of North Korea a bit, but of course North Korea are carrying on with their whole nuclear ambitions as well. Now along comes Donald Trump, and Mr. Modi likewise has been enjoying a bit of weak leadership in the US. Of course, Modi has been pushing his transnational repression. The question is, would he have done that had Trump been in power? I don't know, but it will be very interesting to see over the next few years what Modi's reaction is going to be. Of course, on the face of it, we see a lot of diplomatic messages, Modi congratulating Trump. Of course, we would expect nothing different. Now, what do I see from a Trump administration with India? I think Modi and Trump, certainly in the face of it, are going to get on very well. And I think that Trump, being a real pragmatist, Trump is very much, as I said, all about results. He's a pragmatic man. He's talked about getting peace in Ukraine. He will no doubt stamp down heavily on Iran. I think the Ayatollahs in Iran are quaking in their boots right now because they've had 4 years of freedom. They got all their money back. Their assets were unfrozen by the Democrats. Suddenly Trump's back in power, and suddenly they're going to be put very firmly back in their box. But I think Mr. Modi is going to be thinking, okay, I think we're not going to get away with what we've got away with for the last few years. However, Trump needs India. Trump fears China, rightly so. But China, likewise, fears Trump. Why? Because they know Trump is unpredictable. Yeah. North Korea, China, Iran, all these countries live in fear on a day-to-day basis of Donald Trump because they genuinely think he is that unpredictable he could push that nuclear button. Literally. That is why leaders of these countries always draw back when Trump's in power. And that ironically is what makes him such a good world leader, because he is unpredictable, he is an alpha male, he has this charisma, and people genuinely fear what he could do next. This is what strong leadership is all about, ironically, and this is what Trump brings to the table. So I predict 4 years of a lot of results. Good or bad, who knows? Time will tell and history will judge. But I think the next few years of Donald Trump is going to see a strong relationship with India, because Trump knows he needs India on side to buttress China. But at the same time, Mr. Modi, don't think you're going to get away with this, because Donald Trump is also going to be doing some very strong arm twisting of India. He's going to go to the negotiating table with Mr. Modi and say, look, mate, we've caught you. We've caught you killing Canadian citizens, potentially trying to kill US citizens and other citizens across the world and the Five Eyes nations. We're going to use this against you. We were going to really hurt you unless you start playing our game with us. Now, we can bring a lot of benefit to this table. We can do a lot for India. You're a big market. We can do a lot of bilateral trade talks here. There's a lot of money can change hands, a lot of technology that we can send to India. But that comes at a price. Now, the question then is Mr. Modi mature enough, sensible enough, strategically thinking enough, and not so dogmatically obsessed with the Khalistan movement that he will take this path of least resistance and say, you know what, actually, Mr. Trump, you're right. I think we do need to work together more closely. I think that's the option that Mr. Modi will take, because at the moment he's diverged away into the path of the BRICS. He's working hand in hand with China and Russia. Yeah, the enemy of China is actually no longer such an enemy. We've seen accords signed by Xi Jinping and Modi along that the line of border control. Yeah. That is a softening of the tensions between China and India. We've seen him not shaking hands, physically hugging Mr. Putin. That's what's happened over the last few years under weak leadership from the US. Now Mr. Trump's back in power. I think he's going to bring Mr. Modi arm twisted along into alignment with the US and therefore the Five Eyes and the Western democracies. I think we're going to see on the face of it a lot more closer alignment between India and the West. This will come reluctantly from Mr. Modi, but I think he's going to have his arm twisted through his own strategic errors and his mistakes. I think India is going to be basically forced physically alongside closer to Western democracies now. And I think this will be one of the results of the Trump administration, James.
Absolutely, Angus, and it's no secret that you and I differ when it comes to our confidence level in Trump. But at the end of the day, I have nothing but the respect, highest respect for the office in which he will be taking hold of, for the democratic process, and for the people of the U.S. who have overwhelmingly made their opinions clear that that's what they want. And therefore, my confidence isn't there in Trump, but at the same time, my respect for that office and for the American people, is always great. So let's hope that it works out well.
Indeed, we keep our fingers crossed, as does indeed the whole of the Western world. Who knows what the next 4 odd years can bring? As I say, it could bring World War III or world peace. We will see. I don't think it'll be anywhere in between. So, right, great stuff. Okay, let's move into different areas now, and let's drill down into some more specific stories affecting the community. And I found an interesting article in India. And actually, it highlights one of the issues that we've touched on quite a regular basis. And this is one of the tactics of the RSS over certainly recent years has been this divide and rule, this divide and conquer strategy to try and break up and fragment the Sikh community, both domestically in India and in the Punjab specifically, and of course across the diaspora. And we've seen a lot of evidence of this, where they have deliberately infiltrated a lot of the Sikh organisations and the Sikh infrastructure with their own place people, their own placemen, who have deliberately tried to polarise and divide the Sikh community. And there's an article in Times of India that came out yesterday, which it's a bit of an analysis of this situation. And actually, whether deliberately or not, it's actually picked apart what's going on here and highlighted this very fact. So the article talks about the time when the Sikhs are, through this transnational oppression, this current diplomatic spat between Canada and, of course, the rest of the West and India, that the Sikhs, of course, are caught in the middle of this. They are essentially the subject of this diplomatic crisis. And as a result of this, and during this, there appears, as the Times says, to be a serious leadership vacuum in the community, if not entirely leaderless. The community is, of course, going through its own internal churning and uncertainty, with established institutions battling its own credibility crisis. And though, of course, Sikhs and their issues have been hitting international headlines for decades, of course, we talk about 1984 on a regular basis.
Right.
At the surface, this crisis appears to involve only a section of the Sikh diaspora in Canada. Of course, they are referring to the khalistan. And of course, they do always try to differentiate between the khalistan movement and the rest of the Sikh community. Again, it's this deliberate division. They're trying to divide this wedge between khalistan campaigners and the rest of the Sikh community. And but they say that the Akal Takht Jathedars and the SGPC committee's reactions on different occasions during the crisis have shown that there is a concern in the community back home in the Punjab, and that the communities are not detached from these crises. When external challenges are reaching unprecedented levels, the community is also grappling with internal challenges. And in the diaspora, there are several camps and layers. This is absolutely right. What it's pointing out here, whether it realises it or not, it's pointing to the very fact that the Sikh community has appeared very divided. That there are these different layers, and particularly within the Akal Takht and the SGPC. And of course, don't forget, we haven't had elections in the SGPC for 11, 12 years now. Again, a deliberate tactic to try and break up this unification, this unity of the Sikh community. Now, it does go on, it continues in its analysis to say that now, before, it would normally have been the responsibility of the Shiromani Akali Dal, which remains the community's main political vehicle, to articulate and take positions on issues involving Sikhs. But, of course, the party is facing an existential crisis. An alternate Akali leadership or faction would rise up and replace any established faction, but this hasn't happened since the last election in 2017, when basically it got deeply damaged in those elections. Its power base was deeply undermined. And this is even the case with a potential revival of Panthic politics, of course, through Amritpal Singh when he won the Kador Sahib constituency, and Sarabjit Singh when he won the Faridkot constituency in the recent Lok Sabha elections. So there has been these new emerging parties under Amritpal Singh and leadership through Sarabjit Singh as well. But even as they remain, the Akal Takht and the SGPC have seen an erosion in their own authority over the last decade. They're facing a peculiar situation where support from the larger community remains issue-based or on the merits of a decision. They appear to be vacillating between phases of support and opposition from the larger community. This is a very big word way of saying that what's happening is that people are turning away from the Akal Takht and the SGPCs because when they make pronouncements is that part of the community don't agree with those announcements, or the other party, the other side of the community agrees with it. And again, it's polarising, it's dividing the communities. When they make these very polarising decisions, it is dividing the community. Why? Because it's deliberate. This is all part of the RSS plan to try and get into these institutions, whether it's the Akal Takht or the SGPC, and make deliberate decisions that they know will divide the community, therefore pushing apart and pushing the community away from unity and pushing it away from these very entities that are needed to represent their voice at a more powerful level. The article continues, the community has been protective about both institutions, but it's become clear that that these can be at the receiving end of criticism from within the community. They can't take larger community support for granted when making these decisions. Yes, it's highlighting again, the community is moving away from the SGPC and the Akal Takht because they realise they're not representing the community. They're not representing their own views. They appear to be making interventions at crucial moments, including happenings involving the diaspora. At the moment, the 5 Sikh high priests are handling the Akali Dal crisis, having declared Party Chief Sukhbir Singh Badal Tankaya, in this case guilty of Panthic political misconduct. However, their task doesn't end with the pronouncement of Tanka, the religious punishment. They're also facing the challenge of reviving the Akali Dal, a sentiment being expressed by several sections of the community. Now, in the past, the Akali leaders and top Sikh institutions were known for actively engaging with intellectuals or domain experts in the community, crucial for taking nuanced positions on tricky issues. The gap has been visible in the last few years. And this article, I think, raises this very issue, and of course, the Times of India is another mouthpiece of the RSS. And the Indian establishment. But what they are raising and what they're highlighting, is actually what the RSS have been up to. And it's very successful. And again, this is something we've talked about, James, on a regular basis. It's very easy to destroy a community is you start infiltrating the very organisations that the community puts together to represent their voice. You can't tackle the community as a whole. You can't tackle every person in the community. So a community represents itself by voting, electing people to represent that community. That's how normal political and society works. So the RSS realised, well, we can't tackle every individual Sikh, so let's instead tackle their representatives. Let's get into their institutions, the Akali Dal, let's get into the SGPC, let's get into the Shiromani Akali Dal, let's get into all those institutions, likewise across the West, and let's put our own people in there. And their own people, essentially, they're like sleeper agents. These people act as if, pretending on the face of it to be representing the Sikh community. In reality, they're actually representing the RSS agenda. And so they deliberately make decisions that is going to divide the very people that they represent. They always pick the most contentious issues, these polarising issues, and they make pronouncements, they make decisions that they know is immediately going to alienate a lot of that community. We're seeing this apparently across many Gurdwaras, where many decisions have been made in Gurdwaras that are deliberately alienating the very communities that normally congregate in the Gurdwaras. And we've seen this regularly across social media where people, particularly the young, are disengaging from the Gurdwaras because they're seeing that some of the decisions being made, they're saying, hang on a second, this isn't what we're about. This isn't Sikhi, or the Sikhi that we thought was, that we were brought up in, that we've been nurtured amongst. Again, this is infiltration from outside forces, and by that, of course, read the RSS. They know that the Gurdwara is that unifying force of the Sikh community. So they've deliberately targeted the Gurdwara with their own agents to infiltrate and therefore spread problems, dissent, deliberately polarising the community, deliberately making decisions that will turn away the very people that the Gurdwara is there to unify and represent. It's very insidious, but it's very clever, it's very effective. Times of India have recognised it. Even they are saying, basically, they're saying, look how divided the Sikh community is. That's what the RSS had done. Let's pat ourselves on the back. We've won, is what they're saying. We've managed to divide. Certainly over the last decade or two, we've divided the Sikh community. That is what the Sikh community needs to realise is happening. Of course, many people do. Many in the community are raising this publicly, saying, look, we've got to get back together. We've got to stop this infiltration. This is what the Sikh Federation, for example, has recognised for years. And this is why the Sikh Federation actually now is being a hugely powerful uniting force. And many more are flocking to the banner of the Sikh Federation right across the diaspora, because they realise what the RSS have been up to. They realise what's happening. And the Sikh Federation, they are drawing together all the trusted partners who they know, who they have vetted in the community. And they say, no, we are the true path of Sikhi. We are following Panthic principles. We are following the original Khalsa ethos, the philosophy. This is essentially the new generation of the Sikh community. This is what is going to propel the Sikh community into the future. This is what is going to deliver khalistan. Ultimately, that's what it's all about. So, James, yeah, unfortunately, the Sikh leadership has been divided. It's a very successful tactic of the RSS.
It has, and it's sad to see because, as you pointed out very, very eloquently there, that it is a religion and a people of coming together, of unifying communities, of supporting other religions, of helping people at their lowest points to give them a hand up, not just to, give them something, but to give them some dignity back. And I mean, the other night when I was down at the Surrey Gurdwara, and I was there capturing some images and some video, and I can't tell you how many people that even in the middle of the night, Angus, come out and make sure that I'm warm, tell me there's warm tea inside, that there's food coming, stuff, just they want to look after you and they want to look after each other. And it's just a shame to see that there are people out there that want to break that, to get rid of that, and to come between a unifying force that the Sikh community is. They are unifying, and they are always the first to step up in natural disasters around the world. I mean, it just boggles my mind that they want to destroy, outside forces want to destroy that. But you're exactly right in the fact that that's what's happening.
Yeah, we often say there are only two certain things in life. We often joke that the only two certain things in life is death and taxes. Well, actually, the two other things I would add to that. One is that the truth always prevails. And the second is that human goodness always prevails. In the end, it may take time, but it will prevail. And this is why I always feel so positive and optimistic about the whole concept of Khalistan and the Sikh community, is because, yes, the truth will always prevail. In any society, democracy always prevails because it's based on truth and it's based on human goodness. And that is essentially reflected in Sikh philosophy. So that is why I always feel very positive and confident about the future for the community. So let's move on now. I've got two very quick stories to zip through now that are worth bringing to your attention. And I also did notice that in recent days, a Congress member of the Legislative Assembly in the Punjab, Khaira, what's his name? Sukhpal Singh Khaira, who represents the Congress Party. He's stood up publicly, and bless him, he's actually had the courage to stand up and demand that the Sikh genocide should actually be recognised as thus a Sikh genocide and not a riot. And of course, terminology has always been very important in this whole subject. And he actually came out publicly and he added that he was aware that talking about the issue wasn't easy in Congress, of course, because we all know that the Congress Party was in power during that dreadful time in 1984. Indira Gandhi and her dynasty heavily involved in this and heavily involved in the persecution over many decades of the Sikh community. So Khaira actually stood up as a member of the Congress Party and actually stood up against the flow and actually said, no, look, we've got to recognise this as a genocide. We've got to recognise it for what it was. It was not mere dangi, if I've pronounced that right, essentially riots. It was indeed a genocide. And he said he recognised and acknowledged that it would cause a lot of political damage to both himself and his party too. But he said he only spoke for justice. And in a video message on X, he said, they say justice delayed is justice denied. Yes, James, we've said this a lot. This is what has happened with victims of the Sikh genocide of 1984, as they've been denied justice even after 40 years. This gross injustice with unarmed civilians will continue to be a blot on the criminal justice system and the judiciary of India until justice is rendered. And in the video, he argued that they were not riots between the two communities, but a one-sided massacre and indeed this word genocide. And his Facebook account also put the same message across in Punjabi. He said, I appeal to all parties, especially our party, the Congress Party, to deliver ultimate justice. I think Rahul Gandhi is playing a very big role as the leader of opposition. He's fighting against injustice of all types in the country. He was a kid at that time. For the sake of human values, the Sikhs who had been working for the welfare of all should also be given justice. Now, I think this is a really significant move. Because again, this is another Congress party. Yes, he's a Sikh, but he's a Congress party representative who's also talked about firstly recognising it as a genocide and secondly demanding for justice. And again, I think this is more pressure on Rahul Gandhi. Now, to be fair to Rahul Gandhi, he was a child in 1984, but it was Indira Gandhi, his grandmother, who was responsible for this dreadful events of 1984, the Operation Blue Star, and then, of course, the genocide. She wasn't responsible for the genocide, but the genocide was as a result of Indira Gandhi's assassination, which in turn was a result of her actions against the Sikh community. There is an opportunity here for Rahul Gandhi, as we've talked about before, James, to apologise on behalf of his dynasty, on behalf of India. He could make a massive political step forward, a massive political statement by simply apologising. It's just a few words, but those words would carry an enormous weight, both politically and, of course, emotionally, and help heal those wounds of 1984. Will he do it? I don't know, but this is interesting that another politician, the Congress politician, has stood up once again and revived this whole discussion, revived this talk about genocide, revived this justice delayed is justice denied. And I wonder if Rahul Gandhi has indeed had those thoughts. Maybe, just maybe, he should think the unthinkable and make that apology. Who knows, James, but I do know if he did, what a massive step forward for India as a nation it would be.
And it wouldn't surprise me to see that happen over the next several years, Angus. He seems to be taking a much higher presence in international media, speaking out a lot more than we've seen traditionally in all different areas of international political issues. So I think that he is positioning himself for a long future working for the people of India. And I think that that is going to be a key cornerstone to any success that he has.
Indeed. Well, we will keep an eye on this. But as I say, I think pressure behind the scenes could be mounting on Rahul Gandhi. And I wonder if Rahul Gandhi has actually thought about this whole process. It'll be interesting to see what the Sikh community's reaction, if Rahul Gandhi did apologise, it would be interesting to see what the Sikh community's reaction would be. Of course, forgiveness would be a very big thing after what has been done. But the Sikh philosophy, as I understand it, is generally, it is deeply ingested in human goodness and human values. And I think forgiveness would be forthcoming. Healing, of course, is a different thing, but it would speed up, it would accelerate that long road to healing after the terrible things that happened. Of course, Rahul Gandhi wasn't responsible for that himself, but again, it would heal a lot of those wounds. We'll see. But anyway, let's move on to my final story. Let's quickly zip through J&K. We talked recently about J&K's recent elections. They went through this so-called democratic process after 2019 when Modi's BJP took complete control. They ripped up the constitutional clauses that gave J&K a high degree of autonomy. They ripped up that. It was rubber stamped by the Supreme Court. Modi in 2019 poured his troops, 500,000 troops, into J&K, locked up the local political leaders and took absolute control of J&K. Since then, he's been pushing out this deeply offensive, anti-democratic agenda of ensuring that freedom of speech is clamped down. He's been closing down any dissent. He's been closing down newspaper outlets, any online outlets, any websites that dared hold him to account and saying and calling out his oppression of human rights in J&K. Yeah, he's gone in there with an iron fist and he's absolutely stamped down ruthlessly on any democratic ideals, any dissent, and it's raised outrage and uproar across the Western world and human rights organisations, and of course internally. But of course internally, nobody's dared speak up. Well, as a result, and after the last 5 years, finally his iron fist, that oppressive boot, has been lifted to a certain degree, and he's allowed elections to happen. And elections have happened in J&K. Now, what has happened is that the Indian-administered assembly in Kashmir passed a resolution. This is their first set of resolutions since being elected. And yesterday, they passed a resolution demanding that New Delhi restore the disputed Muslim majority territories' partial autonomy, cancelled in 2019. And they said that this special status that they had in 2019 was lost after these mass arrests and the months-long communications blackout. And of course, since then, New Delhi have been taking control. But last month, after it elected its local legislative assembly, with voters choosing, funnily enough, a non-BJP opposition into power. Yeah, the BJP lost those elections, what a surprise. But the newly elected assembly called upon the government to initiate dialogue with elected representatives for restoration of that special status. They're saying, we want our special status back. So the first elective assembly, the first thing that they do is saying, look, thanks and all, but we want our freedom back. You've given us elections, now can we have our freedom back? It's very simple. Now, the 29 BJP members in the 90-seat House opposed this non-binding resolution, which requires the approval from the federally appointed governor. So, what's happened here? Let's just recount what's happened. Is that this new legislative assembly have been democratically elected into power. The first thing they've come up with is resolution, but it's a non-binding resolution because it requires approval from the federally appointed governor, the governor appointed by New Delhi. So in other words, it doesn't matter what the democratically elected assembly decide. It has to be signed off and approved by New Delhi. So, I'm sorry, my understanding of democracy is that the democratically elected assembly make decisions that are then rolled out as they've been elected to do. Unfortunately here, New Delhi just says, no, sorry, we don't approve it. Yeah. So that is democracy India style. Now the resolution itself says it reaffirms the importance of the special and constitutional guarantees which safeguard the identity, culture and rights of the people of J&K. So unfortunately, this resolution is completely unbinding. All it's ever going to do is sit there on a piece of paper and that's it. It will never be approved by Chief Minister Omar Abdullah, who has said the Assembly has done its job. Well, it has done its job. But unfortunately, it's never going to be rolled out, is it? Because New Delhi get the final say. So in other words, it doesn't matter. And as we said actually at the time when these elections were announced, these elections are pointless. They are meaningless. They're only lip service to democracy because ultimately New Delhi remains in complete control of J&K. This is a puppet show. This is theatre. It's nothing. It's meaningless. This isn't democracy. The so-called elected assembly of J&K has absolutely no real power whatsoever. The power still resides in New Delhi. This is democracy India style, James.
Absolutely, Angus, and it's something that we've talked about before. It's something that we've seen international organizations such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. They've weighed in on this over the years of how they've been treated in that region. And I think that it may be window dressing, but Modi needs to remember that windows often break. And, you've got to deal with that. So I don't think that it's just Khalistan that he's got to watch for. I think that there are many regions throughout India that are going to look to be separated from them and to have their own sovereignty. So,
as I said, yeah, democracy Indian style is in J&K is we'll just take complete control, and it doesn't matter who you elect or what you decide, we're going to decide for you. Likewise in the Punjab, democratically elected Amritpal Singh, where is he? He's in prison still on trumped-up charges. Again, it's I just shake my head in despair. But things will change. You mark my words. Things will change. Democracy always prevails in the end. People power always prevails in the end. So unfortunately, the BJP and the RSS are just sitting on a ticking time bomb. Let's see when it goes off. Right, James, let us move on to our comment section. Thank you as always to each and every one of you who have commented and poured in loads of wonderful comments. So our first set of comments, the first one comes from Canada with a man. Yes, yesterday was just to divert attention from Amit Shah. That's India's strategy. They did it in India. Yes, Canada with a man, you're absolutely bang on. I think a lot of people have really cottoned on to what's going on here. As I said, it didn't take rocket science to work out what was going on. And Amanpreet Sandhu says the same. It's a setup by Modi to divert attention. These Hindu guys are gangsters from India. They're sent into the USA and Canada under fake IDs. This was told by a high-ranking police officer. Yeah, absolutely, James. And I think we said, in fact, we know that the various accused under Najjar, they were Hindu gangsters. Effectively, they were imported into Canada under dodgy visa schemes. And the only terrorists importing into Canada, as Modi accuses Canada of doing, the only terrorism we see in Canada is actually from these Hindu gangsters.
Yeah, that's right. And of course we want to remind everybody that not all Hindus are gangsters, and it represents such a small fraction of the population that, we are not anti-Hindu. We are against the government and processes that are in place that oppress and that criminalize or, act in criminal manners, not only in India, but around the world. So, just a reminder that we are not anti-Hindu, we are not anti-India, we are anti-bullshit.
Absolutely. And we saw
treated with respect.
Yeah, and we saw those mobs of Hindu rioters just the other day, out armed Hindu mobs rioting in the streets. Again, these are a lot of them will just be ordinary Hindus who've just been whipped up by these agents provocateurs. They're almost victims in themselves. They don't realise how they've been manipulated. They've been played by RSS agents, and that's what they're not realising. That's what they need to wake up. So, anyway, Charming Hope also says. Sorry, James?
Oh, I was just saying it's the pack mentality.
Exactly. That is exactly it. Humans are herd animals by nature, and that's what it is. It's pack mentality. Charming Hope, this is an interesting one. India's used to seeing insane, violent Hindu mobs on the streets almost every year. But this time, they're going for an international performance. They're exporting. This is one of their great exports. On that awful note, let's move on. Jora Rai says, troublemaker Modi is happy to disturb the peace in Canada, where actually we see a real democracy. Indeed, we do. And Mukhtar Singh says, it's very important, this comes back to that same point, it's very important that the Sikh community is not seen as the aggressor, but in fact the defender. Absolutely, Mukhtar. And again, we'll keep reiterating this. We're winning the battle. We're winning the battle primarily because the Sikh community, the Khalistan campaigners, remain peaceful, positive, always with a smile on the face. It looks great on camera. And all we're seeing across social media are videos, hundreds of videos of angry, rioting, armed Hindu mobs. There's nothing the RSS or Hindutva can do if they haven't got the material to turn back against Sikh community. If they can't find videos of angry Sikh mobs, they can't show videos of angry Sikh mobs. It's very simple.
Yeah, the technology.
Right, this was a long comment from.
They'll get fake videos out there soon enough as well.
Oh yeah, well let's not go down the AI route. That's a whole different ball game. Right, there's excuse me, a very long comment from Oz, and I did again pick out a few elements of this comment because there's a lot of very important points in this, and again we could almost do a whole show on this one comment alone. But I'll just quickly flick through this. India is a British-made Indian subcontinent or a British colony into one country. The West made India. India didn't fight for it. This is an absolutely spot-on point. India is an artificial construct. It was an artificial construct of the British Empire. It wasn't created through, like many countries are, through years and sometimes even centuries of conflict and fighting, and they just naturally evolve into countries and their boundaries are naturally created through various conflicts. India was literally, it was just a man-made construct by the British Empire. So it's only held together through essentially colonialism. Next point, India isn't a producer, it's not an exporter, it's an importer. In Buddhist time, Indian subcontinent was divided into 1,000 countries. No single country has multiple languages, like 21 different ones. Now, this is a point saying that India actually is naturally made up of lots and lots of different constitutional points, little elements. It is not one united country under one culture or language. It's made up. And this reminds me, many years ago, I was working in the Middle East, Dubai, right. And I had a lot of Indian friends. We used to sit around the dinner table. And the common language amongst, there must have been, 10, a dozen Indians sitting at that table from different parts of India, Kerala or Maharashtra, all these different parts of India. And they always used to speak, even amongst themselves, in English. And I thought this was strange. I thought they were being polite to me as the token Englishman. Right. And I asked one of my friends, I said, why do you talk to each other in English? And they said, well, that's the only language that is common amongst us, because we all speak these different languages. And it was an education to me. I didn't realise all those years ago how different parts of India were, that their languages were so different, their cultures were so different. And this is what this point is all about. India is a union of different states, as Oz says. It's like Israel is a state, it's a Jewish state, and it's a country on its own because it is united by that one common theme of they are all Jews. India itself is made up of lots of, in many ways, different little Israels or different states that are their own unique identity, whether it's a Punjab, whether it's J&K, whether it's Manipur, whether it's Kerala. All these different states are their own cultural identity. So again, it's all part of this artificial construct. Truth is, Indian empire is corrupt and rotten. Now, there's a whole paragraph about how India is deeply corrupt. India will remain corrupt until its empire falls. They sell you nationalism. Yeah, this is the whole RSS Hindu Rashtra idea. But you and your children will suffer forever because of politicians and their hunger for power. And just like many Indians think Africa is a country. Yeah, many people think Africa is a country. Even many in the US think Africa is a country. Yeah. No, Africa is made up of lots of different countries. Africa is a continent. And that essentially is what India is really, in reality, is a continent. It is a construct of many different little countries. Yeah. Finally, India is a subcontinent, and many countries like Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, to whom India Empire claims as part of Akan Bharat, where they claim all Indian subcontinent countries. I want to say many Indian subcontinent countries are still not free, they just transferred power. And again, this point comes back to the British. All they did when they handed India its independence, the British establishment handed power, they handed a colony to a new colonial ruler, the Brahmins. So India, as many of our Sikh guests on our podcast have said, India remains colonized. India is still a colony. It is a colony ruled by the Brahmins. That essentially is what this comment is all about, James. A very interesting comment, this one.
Absolutely. And they're spot on that there is still a lot of corruption within the country. And I really don't see that ending while Modi's in power. But at the same time, if they truly want to be a democracy and come to the big boys table, as you refer to it, Angus, in terms of being recognized as a developed nation, then they're going to have to deal with that corruption issue.
Yeah, and India is still like the old Soviet Union. It is made up of lots of different countries, and one day, one catalytic event is going to break it apart, almost catastrophically. India will break apart. I have absolutely no doubt it's going to happen, simply because of these sorts of fundamentals. So thank you for that comment. I think it actually was a copy and paste, and you credited that, so thank you for that. Kuljit Mangat says, I feel like the Indian government are trying to incite a war with Canada and NATO countries. I've heard lots of times on Indian media very aggressive words from Indian politicians and ex-military personnel. Well, I think maybe, I think India would be a little bit ambitious to incite war with NATO. I don't really, I think a lot of this is just rhetoric. I think it's just the BJP rhetoric. Unfortunately, I don't think in reality they're trying to incite a war, although it does actually sound like it, James. I think in reality, India really don't want to pick a fight with NATO.
No, and Canada doesn't want that against India either. As I said, we respect the nation, we love the people. It's just the political policies that we're having issue with.
Absolutely. And 27499 says, definitely it's the Indian government behind all these troubles. They're causing to divide Sikhs and Hindus rather than admitting that they've made mistakes. 40 years no justice for the Sikhs in India. Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. And yeah, as we often say, James, the Indian government are deliberately trying to divide the communities. They're trying to turn people against Hindus. They're trying to turn the Hindus against the other communities, whether it's the Muslims, the Christians, or the Sikhs. And we're seeing this right across the diaspora. I mentioned yesterday about here in the UK, in Leicester, we had Hindu-Muslim riots between each other. Again, it's been whipped up. We're now seeing it in Canada, where Hindu mobs are taking on the Sikh community. Again, this is breaking up decades old communities that have lived side by side perfectly happily, perfectly amicably. It's an evil, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And one of the big mistakes that they made as well is going after law enforcement in the riots and what was happening there over the last week. Because we are not the US. We actually have a lot of respect for law enforcement overall in Canada. There are some that don't, but overall, we do. And we support our law enforcement because we know that they are giving of themselves and their families are giving to protect us. So.
And Amrik Singh comes in with a comment. The Hindus don similar RSS tax in Leicester. Yeah, and actually, yeah, of course, yeah, you spotted the same similarity, obviously recognising what the RSS have been up to here in the UK as well. We do know the RSS are very active here in the UK. Ashley Kandar, is it a riot or is it a genocide? Sorry, couldn't resist. I chuckle at that, Ashley. Thank you for that comment, and it was taken in the spirit in which it was delivered. So thank you for that little deliberate provocation. Hamzal Abbasi, how much money are you taking for your shitty propaganda? India is rising. There is no Khalistan. Well, thank you, Hamzal, for your comment. We're not taking an awful lot of money. I wish we were for our shitty propaganda. And I don't think it's that shitty. I thought we were doing a very good job. Clearly we are. Our channel is increasingly popular, I'm delighted to say. India is indeed rising. India is a fabulous country. India is a future superpower, and I cannot wait to visit that wonderful country and its wonderful people. But when you say there is no Khalistan, at the moment, you're absolutely right. There is no Khalistan yet, but it will come and it will sit side by side alongside a rising and a wonderfully successful India. And an India that I hope will shake off the RSS, that will shake off its evil caste system. And once it does, it will rise as a beacon of democracy, as a beacon of the rule of law, and it will become a future wonderful nation in the world. I look forward to that day, James.
We've talked about this many a times, Angus, and I'm totally with you. I can't wait to visit myself and see the strengths of India because we know they've got many.
Indeed, Hamzal. So thank you for your comment. Thank you for your appreciation for our show. Do keep watching and keep commenting. So thanks for that. And a final one from Neutrality 456 from Delhi, support Khalistan. Now, I did this one because I haven't actually had time to check, but I suspect this name rings a bell. Wasn't Neutrality in Chicago and also somewhere else under a different name, James? I don't know if you remember this one.
We're keeping us wondering and keeping us on our toes there, Angus. We'll have to question that. Where are you from?
Well, maybe you're originally from Delhi. I don't know, but anyway, Neutrality. thank you for your comment. And maybe we've got it completely wrong. I don't know, but it's always fun. Maybe you're one of those ultra mobile people of the 21st century who hops about between Chicago, Delhi and different accounts. I don't care. All that matters is that you support Khalistan. We will take support from wherever it comes. And thank you for that. And also a big thank you to all our commenters for all the comments that have been pouring in. Thank you for your support and thank you for forming part of our wonderful community. But unfortunately, we must draw things to a close once again for Perspectives. Don't forget to keep those comments coming in. Thank you for all your supportive comments. Thank you to our critics. Thank you for our rude comments, which are always great for a laugh and always keep us highly entertained and always great for a bit of banter, so keep those coming too. But in the meantime, don't forget you can also email us directly at message@satellitetv.com if there's something you'd like to bring to our attention that you don't want to put in the public domain. Thank you for your emails that have come in the meantime. But we must draw things to a close. It is a goodbye from me and it is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thanks so much for watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.